Hi, everybody. Welcome to UNE's annual Constitution Day. This is a federally mandated day, which Senator, is it Robert Byrd?
Yes, 2004.
2004, former member of the Ku Klux Klan. Am I getting that right? Got it through the Senate that any institution getting federal assistance, any college, had to have a Constitution Day, possibly an unconstitutional mandate. But we here at UNE have decided to run with it. And so this year we decided to come at it from a slightly different angle. Instead of talking about the U.S. Constitution, you know, Second Amendment, this or that, we thought, you know, we have someone here at UNE who has been thinking about, working on, consulting with the UN about the effort to create a state in Libya. We all know that Hillary Clinton ruined Libya a few years ago. At least I heard that on the news. Is that true? And someone's got to put it back together. I'm just kidding about that, by the way. And part of that is thinking about what is the constitution of a new state? What are our priorities? How do you bind a nation together and preserve the freedoms of the people thus bound? And we thought it'd be interesting to come at the whole question of Constitution Day from this other angle. Look at the effort to achieve a constitution in a state that is struggling to do so. And it's really lucky for us that we have Ali Amida here on campus, who really cares about this deeply on a personal level and has also been working on this on a practical and intellectual level. So I'm really looking forward to what he has to say, and I think it'll help us think a lot about our own Constitution as well. So without further ado, Ali Amida.
Thanks, Brian, and I would like also to thank our assistant Mary for working so hard to help organize this event, and also Dave in the back, who every year comes to help us make this event a big one, and also connect us with our other campus in Portland. I want to also say something about this theme, because it wasn't my choice, even though Brian is correct. I have been working with the Libyan civil society and the transitional government for almost 5 years, in many ways in concert with others, trying to help create a democratic, representative new government and a new system in Libya. And I think from distance I tried, not so much distance because I have been traveling back and forth either to Libya or working through the UN commissions to help in the process of aiding the Libyan people create a democratic civic republic. Brian has to be accredited, even though he's nagged me for 2 years to do this subject. And I kept saying, Brian, no. Bird will curse me in my sleep, and I will say, do something about the American Constitution. And he said, Ali, let's do it creatively, and so and so. So finally, I gave in to him and decided to do this subject matter. And I spent this last weekend reading about both how the American Constitution was negotiated and created, not in the story that you guys learned in high school, but also in, and after that, but also the things that we don't talk about much. And also I began to think and call, and I read zillion commentaries. I called Libyan constitutional scholars and representatives in the Constitution Commission that was elected in 2014. And even retired Supreme Court Justice, who was a friend of my late father, who was retired in his 80s, and I called him and we had a whole hour conversation about how he views and how he thinks about it. And also I talked with Libyan women organization that has been contesting the agenda and the election and the work of this commission. So to my surprise, instead of the story which we hear in the news about current conflict in Western, Central, and Eastern Libya, which is a truly the name for it will be a civil war. Other section of the country hasn't been really impacted by what's going on in these places, and there is a lively, very, very genuine societal forces that has been engaging and involved in how to think about the constitution, and also the very, very tough question regarding the name, the identity, the capital, the religion, the national anthem, the capital of the country, federalism, the place of Islam in the new republic, and all of these really very, very interesting issues that are related to the new Libya. Now, I want to warn everybody that what's going on inside the country now is, on the one hand, Libya is in a state of civil war since 2014. And in 2011, when I became active in the national media and international media, I was asked often what's about the new Libya, and I said the situation in Libya is contingent. Many, many Libyans did not want to topple the regime, but when the regime forces opened fire and killed hundreds of people, people began to think that you can't, reform a government like this, and they began to defect from the camp of reforming the old regime to maybe we should get rid of it and replace it with more democratic, more representative government. So the Arab Spring uprisings, including the Libyan one, were not really staged or had an outcome that was orchestrated and also thought of. It was people uprising in a democratic uprising in a spectacular way, including the Libyan one, without really thinking about people. Maybe the biggest pitfall or the flaw in these uprising, this coalition of middle class and working class groups and marginalized people, especially led by the youth, who are like many of our students in this place, they did not think about what happened after we get rid of these regimes. So the idea is these regimes are repressive. You cannot reform them. We want democratic, peaceful transition to a better republics. As we know, after these regimes were toppled, you will have a vacuum filled by armed groups, regional agendas, and international allies. So that vacuum unintentionally became captured by these forces inside these countries who were not interested in the democratic reform and transition, and also regional forces like the monarchies in the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula, who want to get rid of these republics because they were thorn in their side, and they financed and supported groups that are allies with them. Regional European and I have to say, we could talk about the Obama administration's fault. I think that suffice to say, as far as our government is role in this, President Obama admitted that this is the worst case in my whole presidency, which is true. Now, bashing Hillary Clinton is now, people come at her from all sides. There is a truth that the whole Obama administration dropped the ball on the Libyan people. And in 3 elections, the Libyan people, men and women, elderly and youngster, they voted in a democratic elections, and the hardcore Islamists did not win in Libya. So the Libyan people actually voted for the National Congress, for the Parliament, and for the Constitutional Assembly or Commission that was in charge of hammering and drafting a new constitution for Libya. What happened is, In Libya, the vacuum was filled by the most powerful groups. And unfortunately, because of historical accidents, Libya had almost, some estimates, 26 million piece of arms and weapons in a small country of 6 million people. The most armed and organized groups were regional militias and the Islamists. The Islamists could not really win international, the political Islamists, I should be very precise here. They could not win. So they did not like the elections, the first and second election, and they took over the city of Tripoli, and they allied with a city of the third largest city in Libya, Misrata, which has the most organized militias, and they controlled Western Libya. Eastern Libya was controlled by a general who, from the old army, who was exiled in the United States, and now he is really organizing against the ISIS and the other groups in Benghazi and Derna, and the city of Sirte, in this vacuum that occurred after the February 17, 2011, the vacuum, in a political vacuum, collapsing of the national army, the police, the state apparatus that kept and guarded the borders and the shores of Libya. They even, their allies, allowed them to come to Libya and take over the city of Sirte, which is now a battleground between the central government in Western Libya and fighters who are actually not Libyans. 80% of them are from Arab and Muslim countries who took advantage of the vacuum, and they controlled that city, and they're almost being routed now in central Libya. So this is really the larger security and also development that shaped the background to the process of creating, of hammering and drafting a new constitution for Libya. So in one sense, there are elections, including the constitutional commission. On the other hand, the situation in Libya is really dire and tough. Whether this is going to lead to a constitution that would be adopted and being voted in a national referendum or not, that's really an open possibility for the future. What I would like to say after this general background for us so we understand what is going on, I want to make a broad argument. And then we'll see, I'm going to present to you some of the narrative that probably will be related to support this argument. Constitutions are not just formal, sacred texts. Constitutions are created by men and women and influenced not only by internally but also regional and international factors today. Constitutions are negotiated continuously from a sociological, historical, and critical perspective. In our own society, the rule of law is maybe the most basic thing that unified us in the United States. And without amendments, without revision and struggles of generation of women, men, and other people who were excluded from the constitution that was drafted in the 18th century, America will not be what it is today. Keep in mind that women were excluded, Afro-Americans were excluded, Native Americans were excluded, people of no property were excluded, and the only 70 and out of that maybe 40s people who ratified and signed the Constitution of the United States. It is, people will argue, and I'm one of them, that what's unique about our society, not that Constitution itself, the struggles of social movements from all aspects of society that made the Constitution broader, more inclusive, and more egalitarian than it was in the 18th century. Because the 18th century, while it's one of the most modern institutions, it was also a very, very much limited constitution. That's a very, very kind word for that. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Then the argument is how we define who is American. Who is American? The 19th century the Civil War was an argument about how to negotiate and how to think about who is American. And in the 20th century, the struggle for civil rights and for women and environments and children and other aspects of our society was a way of negotiating and really trying to make it more inclusive. In the 21st century, it's going to be also a battle. Except that the strength of American Constitution, that whether we agree with it or not, America created the political system, has strong institutions, and without the rule of law that corrects and expanding that, the United States probably will be very limited. One could argue that we have a lot of corruption in the United States. We have extreme degree of corruption. But without the rule of law and the rule of courts to correct these flaws and these mistakes, probably will be worse than a lot of countries. So having strong institutions and trying to negotiate them and lobby them and pressure them, either through elections or through lobbying or arguments in civil society, this is how you make the law as part of the living realities and not a static, frozen documents. Libyans now are negotiating. How should we define who's a Libyan? They are negotiating their identity, their constitution, and it's a really tough and a very, very hard a process. But at the same time, they are going at it as they did in 1951 when they created the Libyan state with the help of the United Nations. And they created a very, very democratic institution in 1951. And then after that, they amended the constitution and they created the second one in 1963. Right now, I almost see the same argument, the same debates, the same heated views about who's a Libyan. And the research I have done recently to find out I'm going to share with you right now about the process, the ongoing process of negotiating who's Libya, how to define Libya as a country, and what's the context, the models, and the symbols related in this process of ongoing negotiations. Now, some of you probably who listen to some of my talks at UNE or were my students or I spoke in other classes, I think I always try to locate the Libyas historically as a settler colony. It was invaded by Italy, and the Libyan people faced one of the most brutal wars in Africa. Between 1911 and 1943, many of us who are in the field, we think that 500,000 people perished in these wars, and 60,000 people died in the concentration camps in central Libya. I'm writing a book about that, and it's going to be out early next year. And the father of the country is this figure here, this man. His name is Omar Mukhtar, who led a very, very glorious anti-colonial resistance for almost 20 years, but eventually they captured him and they hanged him. He was not really, was strong ethically and brilliant leader who refused to be corrupted or bribed. And they hanged him in 1931, and he became the symbol of Libyan nationalism. He is, I would say, the founding father of modern Libya. Libya was among the early African and Arab states to gain independence. It gained independence in 1951, and the UN who created Libya actually, because of the Cold War consideration, and because Italy was on the side of the Nazi Germany, they took the grandson of a Sufi social movement, very well much the symbolic leader of Eastern Libya, and they appointed him as the first king of Libya. Now, that became a little bit, tough because Eastern Libya was royalist, led by the king. Eastern Libya had a republic in 1918. So republican ideas were very common in Western Libya. The compromise for the Western Libyans to accept King Idris I was to keep Libya unified. So the idea that Libya will be unified and the Eastern leadership decided either you accept the leadership of Prince Idris I or we're going to secede from Libya. So the grand compromise was, okay, we'll accept monarchy or monarchical system in Libya, and Libya was declared a federal monarchy in 1951. In 1963, as we'll see, the monarchy or the federal system was abolished and replaced by a unified unitary system, and they made a compromise that's very interesting. The constitution was made of long, negotiations, and also models from the United States, from Europe, from other places, the Arab countries. And they adopted a compromise I find very fascinating, which is an American one. The king insisted on the fact the notables and the leaders, conservative segment of the society should be represented. So they created bicameral system for the legislative. The House of Representatives is elected through proportional demographic representation. The Senate was appointed by the king. And the king chose 20 from Eastern Libya, 20 from Western Libya, 20 from Southern Libya, which is Fezzan, the region where I was born and grew up, which has only 70% of the population. It reminds me of the grand compromise in the American constitutional debates where small states refused to accept the dominance of the big states, and the Senate became, each state had 2 senators, and the House of Representatives was based on the demographic proportional representation. It's a wonderful, it's not a perfect solution, but it's a solution that was enduring and satisfied people together. Now, after of course, the February 17 revolution, Western Libyans who say, oh no, we have 2/3 of the population, 60% almost, and 30% in Eastern Libya, and Southern Libya had only 70%. How come we have this? And there is a lot of high emotions going back and forth. The Constitution, as we will see, the new one, tried to keep that compromise today. In 1969, there was a military coup in the age of anti-colonial nationalism, and led by a junior officers. The head of that organization is Colonel, he wasn't colonel at that time, he was Lieutenant Muammar Gaddafi, and they all came from poor, backgrounds, except 2 of them, and they toppled the monarchy, which they accused of being very much the creation of colonialism, and they had a populist republic that really used anti-colonialism and the memory of the struggle to its utmost to justify its existence. Gaddafi, I would argue quite a bit in my books and in the last 20 years, he kept some of the symbols there, Islam, piety, and a lot of things that are supposed to be public symbols for the population. But at the same time, he created a republic and tried to rely on Central and Southern Libya as a social base, using the oil revenues against the oil corporations to finance and mobilize and reward his allies. You could see that Gaddafi here trying to present himself as a pious Muslim, which we know that's also very, the record is now is mixed about that, and it shows that in public, leading Africans and North African groups, and even in the Eid prayers, and sometimes in the religious celebration as well. Now, here is Libya, as you could see, Tripolitania, Fezzan, and Cyrenaica. Tripolitania, as I said, has almost 60% or 2/3 of the population. Fezzan is an important strategically, and it has, of course, always the frontier region of Libya. It has only 7%, Cyrenaica 30%. The constitution was drafted in 1952, as I said earlier, and it was revised and amended in 1963. And Libya, when I think about 1950s, and one time, perhaps in the future, I would like to write something about it. It has a very relatively, in comparison with a democratic constitution, and very lively press, and very modernizing program. I came to the end of that program through education and through also the media and the open society that was very lively. At the same time, it was geared toward the elite in the top, and also made alliances with the United States and United Kingdom, and had the largest military bases American military base in the Mediterranean, and near Tripoli, and the other one near Tobruk. They also were quiet about what happened in the colonial period. So it was a typical conservative yet democratic modernizing monarchy. It became a victim of its own modernization program, where the students and the younger generation who were educated under its schools and military academies and universities became really the most critical, because they were educated and they also were mobilized for more egalitarian and nationalistic goals. The constitution amended in 1963, and Libyan women had the right to vote, and after they really lobbied heavily for it. And this is really something different than the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula. Libya, even though it's kind of conservative in some sense, but modernizing in some sense, it has really a strong drive by civil society for more representation and more bigger role in the decision making. As you could see, this is Libya, and Libya is not small. Libya is probably bigger than Texas and Alaska, folks. So this is a big state. And even though its population is 6 million today, it's really a large country. And because of its size, regionalism is really a fact of life. So you have Eastern Libya, Western Libya, and Southern Libya as really, always had different dialects, different kind of regional character. The oil was a factor in allowing the state to invest on infrastructure, on education, on national symbols like Boy Scouts, like youth organization, military academy, urbanization, and a lot of things. And that really helped create modern Libyan nationalism that has its base in the colonial period. Now, the commission was elected in 2013, and they followed the example of the 1951-63 constitutions. They elected 60 members, 20 from each state, and they kept the compromise of 1951-1963. So each region, the three regions of Libya, had 20 representatives. And I digged about whether women were elected or not, and there were 15 representatives in the assembly. Libyan women organization were really upset, and they said we should have quota 50-50. But I spoke with one of the scholars who was elected, and she said, our voice was heard, but the women organizations are split. Some are supporting what's going on now, and as a starting point, others are boycotting the process. The others who boycotted the Constitution Commission were the minorities like the Berber and the Tuareg and the Tubu, who make between 5 to 10%. And some of the Islamists who don't believe in democracy per se. They say, we don't believe in it. This is a mockery. This is against God and against the Sharia. And they decided to boycott the elections in the first place. But the vast majority of the people are elected, and people are very, very proud of the fact that they voted. We voted 3 times, Ali, and nobody is really taking us seriously. And they are trying to go around our voice by, forcing through the guns and to the barrel of a gun their own choices. So in that sense, the election was very interesting. Now, they created some rules. When I read their records, they created some rules. On some of these rules, they said, and the operational procedures for the committee or the commission, where vote, a decision would be taken by 2/3 plus 1. So 60, you need to have at least 41 for a decision on all of these aspects of the Constitution will be. But then there are people who couldn't go and attend the meetings in Eastern Libya because of the civil war, and some got caught in between. Some really were upset with the choice of the president of the assembly or the commission. And there are a lot of contestation and anger going back and forth. The commission also made a very controversial decision, which is in the social media and also in the web and the internet. The debates are now going back and forth, and there are lawsuits against them. And so they decided that you can't really have 41 because there are people who were not really, couldn't attend. And we, as a commission, we're going to make it 36 or 37 and instead 41. And there was a lawsuit against the decision. And actually, this legal scholar won the case. But the argument that the country is going to disintegrate, we have to continue this, is still open issue. Then they decided to meet in a different country. So the country of Oman in the Southern Arabian Peninsula agreed to accept them, and they hosted them there. It's not very democratic one, but they accepted them, and they tried to host them there. And some people supported that decision, but others are very, very angry in the media and also the internet, regarding that decision. At any rate, the commission finished its deliberation, and I discovered there were quite a bit of areas of agreement and areas of conflict, and some resolved, and some resolved with very, very tough and maybe conflicting results. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the things that where the negotiation actually was good. Things worked for them, and I thought they were creative, and I commended them for that. Now, this is the flag of the Libyan independence. It's also the monarchy. They correct me when I talk to them. I say, isn't that the monarchy too, folks? They say, no, Ali. Professor, this is the flag of independence. Let's go not be fixated on the monarchy itself. Gaddafi, when he came to power, he said, oh, that's the monarchy, reactionary monarchy thing. We're going to select a new one. And he selected a plain green flag. And people tell me, Ali, this is really green. There is no character there. I mean, we want to see something really interesting about Libya. And we like the colorful crescent and the star and 3 colors. It's more interesting. So it became a contentious one. I think the creative solution worked at the end. Now, with a caveat. When people began to advocate, this is the flag of independence. Libyan representative chose this flag. And actually there was an ad, and everybody was designing it, and then they said it really combines Libyans' struggle and Libyan cultural identity. As you know, the crescent and the star, this is the symbol of Islamic, praying and Islamic calendar. And so this is, you'll find many Muslim countries have a flag like this one, including secular Turkey. You'll find the flag like that. And the other ones, I think there's a lot of explanation why they choose these colors, but they said this is really based on consensus and deliberation, and eventually most Libyan accepted this flag. Now, Gaddafi regime, or the republic in '69, when they chose that flag, they tried to also to appeal that was the flag of the from the Islamic past, and the green is the color of Islam. At any rate, I think more Libyans now accepted the flag, and the flag is everywhere. I'm going to talk a little bit about the American flag as we proceed after this one, but it seems that the compromise now, vast majority of Libyans accept this flag. The only problem, which I have to say I was correct in this, Libya still has no truth and reconciliation, and a lot of people try to exclude Gaddafi's supporters, which not small size. And many of them live in exile, or are kind of treated as a pariah inside Libya. And I have fought against a law that called the law of exclusion, like in Iraq, which I said, don't repeat the Iraqi situation. That was disastrous. Don't exclude people. Don't take revenge. Take the Islamic tradition of mercy and forgiveness. And unfortunately, this is not really resolved yet. But a lot of people are outside the political process, and they still cling to the green flag. So in other words, what I'm trying to say, a true national reconciliation, and I'm working even on proposing a model for national reconciliation. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to Tunisia in 2 weeks because they gave me only 2 weeks to come and present that. So I told them I can't come in 2 weeks. I have my students, I have family obligations, and if you invite me and give me more time, I will come and share with you what I did in researching which model should be followed. So this is actually a nice compromise for now. This compromise will succeed more, in my opinion, if the people who were not included in the political process will be welcomed in. They could go back to Libya, and people could participate, minus the torturers, the murderers, the one who really committed atrocities. Then this will become, I think, quite a reasonable compromise in the negotiations. Now, if we just want to, look at the United States Constitution, there was no, we know the story about the Constitution, and actually America had only 4 million people that time in the 18th century. And the negotiations was led by 70, but the one who really were active around 40 or 50 in many ways. And Rhode Island, as we know, they didn't want to have a central government, so they boycotted the election as the Islamist, and in another way, and the Berber and the Tobo and the Tuareg who are boycotting the Constitutional Commission in Libya. Now, the American, flag is a very interesting one. It's as we know, it was the 13 colonies, and then after that they expanded. It's very, very interesting, but when you look at it, there is nothing in it in the Constitution itself. And when I looked at some of the ruling of the Supreme Court, in 2002, in the case of Johnson versus Texas, the Supreme Court said, burning the flag actually constitutional. So while it's a symbol of the country, the court up in 2002, they said, the First Amendment guarantees that, which was very, very upsetted many people at that time. But balancing the national flag, which is the symbol of everything, as any modern nation state, and at the same time having the First Amendment being taken seriously is the debate within American society until now. Now, a lot of people who, of course, dispute this. And I noticed that in America, as somebody who was born in Libya, but also became a citizen by choice later on, I always pay attention to these things. And I noticed in America, especially in the East Coast, the flag is everywhere. In the West Coast, it's not the case all the time. And also, I noticed something shared with my colleagues quite a bit. I noticed something very unusual. In cemeteries, you find the flag. And I try to understand it. It sounded odd to me, but then when I explain how we in the United States look at it, it's something different. It's about the army, and it's a city upon a hill. So, that's really different from what my grandfather and my father told me. When we face God, we are not just, we are just human beings. So no flag, no other things that are supposed to be there. I think in America, we see it differently. So there is something very, very unique about the symbol of the country, especially a multi-ethnic and immigrant society as ours. The flag symbolized unity and symbolized also the military, and also the very, very curious relationship where we have a secular constitution but a very conservative society, comparatively. And religion, while it's really comparatively, in America, religion is a civic religion, is very much alive and part of the fabric of the society. The constitution, one could argue, is secular, means that you separate the two. But even that brings the question that often overlooked, which is the separation, the degree of separation religion from politics in constitutions. It's not a matter of clear cut. There are various constitution and various societal situations where you could see the difference is not the same. France is more secular than us. They look at us as very conservative. England, the Queen is the head of the Anglican Church. Egypt is secular republic. Turkey is secular republic. But the degree of secularism or separation between religion and politics is not a matter of, there are people who are secular and republics or a system that are not. I think we need to overlook that and look at the degree and how these things are negotiated. And France now going through a crisis of a republic where everything religious being dismissed. And I think the new immigrants, the Muslim, 6 or 5 Muslim Frenchmen are demanding renegotiating the traditions of republicanism and secularism in France. I think Western Europe, including England, also going through those negotiations now, which is how to accommodate immigrants. In our own society, I would claim that the whole thing about this election, with all its bigotry and sometimes hard opinions and racism, is because we are changing. One could argue that we are changing as a society in many ways. And maybe because there are more progress in American society. That doesn't mean that the question of immigration, doesn't mean that the question of terrorism, that other questions are not real, are not also serious. So symbols are important, and there are various symbols here to think of. Now, the national anthem in the United States, I discovered that it was not adopted until 1812, and the man who wrote that song that was adopted in 1930s and made a law by President Hoover was actually a very latter thing, and it has a line or two that has to do with slaves who promised freedom and went to the British side, and it really has a very nasty biased side to it. So people who want to look at the original symbols, they might have a case in thinking about it. But the national anthem we have it as today is very recent, and only in 1930s where it became ratified as a law. Now, the Pledge of Allegiance that we have, much older, is an interesting thing because there is a phrase that was added to it, and President Eisenhower during the Cold War added, "under God." And the Supreme Court, not Supreme Court, the Circuit Court in, I think in California or so, said that it's not constitutional. So there is a whole debate about where to put God, where to put religion, and which religion we want to put in that sense. Now, I think most of us know the current debate and controversy about the quarterback, Colin Kaepernick of the 49ers, who is from biracial background, adopted by different family. And he protested, and that was really led to other players who joined him. And actually, this is not really new. Athletes in the United States have protested certain aspects during the civil rights movement of our own, political system, our elites, it goes to the Mexico Olympics, if you remember, Carlos, the two sprinters who raised their hands, in protest of what's going on in the United States. It goes to the civil rights movement. It goes to the great personality of Muhammad Ali, who refused to fight in Vietnam because he was called there and went to prison for that. And also many athletes who protested what they see as still police brutality or racism or other things that are really excluding segment of our citizens in the United States. These debates are not really new, and whether we agree with Colin Kaepernick or not, I think it's a debate that allows us to renegotiate the Constitution and the meaning, broadening who's American, who's included. And in that sense, it's really not an aberration or an anomaly in thinking about the American Constitution. It's actually ongoing negotiation for it. Now, I found something also funny because in the Libyan negotiation for the new constitution, one of the things that they debated is which capital we should take. Now, under Gaddafi, Tripoli was the capital, the largest city in Libya, with 1 million people living in it, or 1.5 million. I mean, it's really a big city. But under the monarchy, they really could not agree, so they chose two capitals, Benghazi and Tripoli. And Libya, because there is no dominant city, you have almost two major cities. One is 1 million here, Tripoli, and the other one in eastern Libya, almost 700,000 people. So now they went back to the constitution and they said, okay, as a compromise, let's have two capitals. And then another one I thought was very, very kind of funny. He said, why don't we rotate the capital from one city to another? So we'll have it in Bedford, we have it in Saco, we have it in Augusta, we have it maybe in Wales or York, right, James? And so the good side of it is that people are expressing their opinions and they are participating. Sometimes, of course, people could be silly and could be also out of line here. The language became also a contentious one. Vast majority of Libyans speak Arabic, but the small minority, because of the civil war, they said, we demand our languages to be also included in the constitution. And they said, the commission decided, even though they boycotted the commission, they said Libya's formal language would be Arabic, but also other languages could be supported to express the cultural and the social diversity of Libya. So they came with a little bit of solution for that. The third question is the name of the country. The name of Libya changed. In 1951 was the Federal Monarchy of Libya, the Sanusi Monarchy of Libya. 1963, under the amendment of the constitution, it became the Libyan Monarchy. Under Gaddafi, it became the Libyan Arab Socialist Democratic Republic. A populist name. Right now, they could agree only the Libyan Republic. Now, mind you, there is a competition and variety of opinion on lobbying process going on now. There are federalists who want to go back to the federal system of 1951. The model is the independence period. There are some who want to go to they said that we want a republic, but we want to have a federal system. Some, they even said, let's divide Libya. Libya is too big for that, in many ways. So, the system is being contested. The solution that I liked in the commission, achieved is to call for decentralization, going back to the 1963 constitution and giving, provinces and states more power without calling it federalism, because federalism in Libyan national history is really a bad word, means secession. So that debate has been. Now, the place of Islam, I thought they were really lobbied by the hardcore armed Islamists, and it was backward. The language was backward, going backward in many ways, because the 1951 said God is the source of all sovereignty, of course. And Libya is not really different from places like Ireland, Poland, Israel, Pakistan. There are countries that religion is a national identity, in addition to being, Catholicism in Ireland is national, identity. So we need to really go over, be careful not to say, oh, that's God, this is a religious state. It depends, it always depends on how you take the religion in that sense. That in 1951 Constitution, it was seen as something, Islam is the religion and the one source of the law in Libya. In the new constitution, the language is really not fine Arabic, and I thought it was very, very, very much terrible phrasing. And they said, Islam is the source, and all the schools of Islam, schools of Islamic, Sharia and jurisprudence is to be like this. And there was no need for that. The justices that I interviewed confirmed that. He said, they said, this is silly, because I think the language suffice. You have to, recognize that Islam is the majority religion, but you don't have to kind of shove it in details, allow people to use it or abuse it later on. The other issue that was also, there are people who advocate for children's rights, objected to, for example, I have a cousin who is a very, very well-known novelist, and spent 30 years advocating for children's rights in Libyan society and Libyan constitution. He wrote a whole critique of the constitution. Some women said that the language about using Quranic verses to push for equality for both is misguided. We want a clear, non-religious language. There is also the UN, who were invited to be part of it, to make sure that the new constitution will go along international consensus in certain ideas about human rights. And so they said that in terms of certain areas, they have to be more clear and not to be ambiguous, including the question of the place of religion in the new republic, and also the rights of women and the language for rights of women. So we could see that all of these groups are trying to pressure or engage the commission. The commission did one thing was very interesting. They have an open forum in the internet for people to contest and give them their feedback. So they had a lot of feedback from the society. Right now, there is a split in the public opinion. Some, they say this is the best we could do under all the state of civil war and fragmentation and political conflict in some parts of the country, and we should take it and move forward, because that will unify us. Others, they are saying that there are a lot of flaws and irregularities in the process, and they even sued the commission for that. And that debate is going on very much until now. And what I found very, very refreshing is that people were active, either through the internet, through the mass media, through newspapers, through TV. People are active, and they're trying to really debate and define who is the new Libyan, how to treat each other, what's the new system that's going to guide us in the 21st century. And they did quite well in adopting some aspect from their Libyan social history, which is the Constitution of 1951, the Republic of 1918, the American Constitution, and the compromise between the House of Representatives and the House of and the Senate. I think they did really well. The trouble, in my opinion, is unless you really resolve, have a national reconciliation and stop the guns and the fighting, this really very, very decent attempt to create a new constitution might be undermined, and the country might drift further into more of this horrible civil war. Especially the regional and the international community is watching and letting Libya become really under the mercy of these armed groups. That's where the trouble is. On the other hand, the other possibility, if national reconciliation could be achieved, and the elite that's really fighting each other, they will sit in the table as they have been trying now in Morocco and now in Tunisia. And also our new president will say, we did the Libyan people a lot of wrongs. We helped them get rid of Gaddafi, but we let them pray to the militias and the other regional states. And we owed them help through the UN to help them resolve their differences and maybe establish a new army, a new security apparatus, where those really very, very daring and active ordinary people have done really well for the last 5 years in voting and also expressing their opinions about their future and negotiating a new constitution. The future is contingent. As I always tell my students, this future is not one-way street, and the past is not one-way street, and not, the victorious solution or choices are not the best sometimes. And history is many possibilities. And the Libyan people are not alone. Whether we like it or not, our government and the regional government and the allied government also are participating in the struggle for the future of Libya. Whether that will be a democratic, representative republic under the rule of law, or fragmented a new Somalia on the Mediterranean. I hope it's not the latter. I hope that the Libyan people will succeed. The leaders will be able to learn from the mistakes of the past, and our own role in pressing our new president, and not only taking more active role, but also to stop adding gas to the fire through allies like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and others who are just picking allies in Libya and try to really abuse and use the Libyan people in time of need and time of a crisis, where they don't have their army, they don't have their police, and they are at the mercy of armed groups and armed militias. I am not very pessimistic, but I'm not overly pessimistic. I think it's going to take a lot of struggle inside Libya. Libya needs a new leadership, but also I have no mistake that we need to support them. And we need to do that by learning and recognizing that it's not about some traditional or religious fanaticism. These are ordinary people who are struggling like us for a better future for them and their families. And let me stop here. And I'm sorry it took me longer than I planned. So we'll take some questions.
I think Ali is willing to, if people have a couple questions or just thoughts, start a conversation. I think Ali is willing to answer the
Is it on? Yeah.
It is.
You had mentioned in the 2013, the Constitutional Elected Commission, you said there were seats set aside for minorities, including women. My question is two-part. Do women Libyan women see themselves as minorities, or do they see themselves as underrepresented? And how does the women's movement there for representation compare to the suffrage movement in the United States?
Thanks, Patty. This is, well, the Libyan women actually gained the right to vote in 1963. It's a little bit late, but Libya, remember, Libya only was a colony until literally 1950. So it wasn't really long before they gained the right to vote. They realized later on that the right to vote is not enough without being socially and educationally taken seriously and fighting for social acceptance, as the second and third women movement in the United States did in the 1940s and 50s and beyond. I always believed that in Libya, there is something really remarkable. Under the monarchy and under the Gaddafi's regime, Libyan society pushed for education, and Libyan women now have the highest literacy rate in Africa, where in 1950, Libya had one of the worst literacy rates for men and women. It was almost 95. Libya now had the highest literacy rate in Africa, and one of the highest in the Arab world. The only countries that will be more than Libya will be very small, tiny Emirates like Kuwait and the Emirates, and so that they have a lot of billions and billions of dollars, like, unbelievable, one of the richest countries, small countries in the world. Libyan women, I think, first, their struggle, right to vote, education, social recognition, family rights, and they were very visible in the 2011 revolution. They were very visible. Actually, the revolution started by women mothers who refused to give up, and sisters, because of their their husbands and their brothers were imprisoned, and they protested against a massacre that happened under Gaddafi's regime. And this is how the uprising started in eastern Libya, in Benghazi. During the first election, Libyan women were over 25 or 30 in the Libyan, more than our Congress here in the United States. So they were elected. And they were pushed to give even more seats for them. But the debate was also, like in here, that people said, quota is really not the right thing to do. Let's allow people, to have to elect qualified women. So I think women participated, and they were okay with the commission, where 15 women, I think, were elected. But their trouble is not only whether there should be more women or not, and there are a few voices that said we should have 50-50. Their trouble is that the language sometimes in the new constitution was not really acceptable to them. So I would say that Libyan women, voices really came a long way. They are very visible, and they're very vocal right now. But it's really, right now, it's the question is how to negotiate the language itself that's acceptable to them. Okay, questions? Come on, guys. James, yeah.
I don't know if you know the answers to this, Ali. I was curious, though, in regards to the process for electing judges.
Yes.
Because you mentioned, I'm assuming, the Sharia law, the sort of the Article 2, the traditional Article 2,
Yeah.
which, of course, in certain areas has been problematic because it's generally interpreted in a particularly conservative way. But, of course, the way the Constitution is written is important. The way it's interpreted is even more important. And so the process for electing judges, is it Have you seen anything on that? Is it going to be something that's going to be from a secular standpoint? Is it going to be? Is there going to be any say from, various legislative bodies, or is it going to be a religious institution that's going to be picking judges? I guess that would be the question I'd have.
No, yes. In Libya, Libyan legal and judicial history, you have actually there are three traditions. The first one is civic law. So all judges are actually they follow civic law. In family matters, it's actually the Libyan constitution. All Libyan constitution, except Islamic law, which in most Muslim countries in a variety of ways. There are some liberal interpretation of the Islamic law. Some are more conservative. Saudi Arabia is different than Tunisia. Tunisia different than Turkey. Turkey different than you'll find a variety of interpretation. But in Libya and most of Arab countries, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, civic law is really is what you might call secular law. Is really the model. So most of these laws are modern, taken from Swiss law and constitution, from a French constitution, from American constitution and other constitutions. That's, I think, the misconception about the constitution in these Muslim countries. In family laws, it will be really, it's like Jewish law, where you say marriage, certain, custody or so, or names or what have you, will be related to rabbinic law in that sense. In most of our Arab countries, you will find this is where the Islamic law, or what you call the Sharia, comes. Unfortunately, in the United States, the Sharia has a negative connotation because it became almost like being imposed by a fundamentalist point of view. In Libya, judges are not really elected. In most Arab countries are not elected. But there is one thing, there is a rigorous boards that promotes after certain years, after certain performances, to promote to a prosecutor, an attorney, a judge, a Supreme Court, what have you. So it's not like us in the United States where our election is the key, but there is a very rigorous traditions where there is administrative and legal boards that dictates this. And the judge in Libyan system in many countries, including the mother country that set the tone, Egypt, the judge has incredible authority. And I think one of the pillars of civil society that allowed it to continue for for a long time is the judge has that autonomous position. In the old days, the judge had only God and the certification that he is really qualified to become judge by his teachers or the boards for that. In modern times, after independence, it became civic, secular boards that selects them. So that's the, and people who see themselves a little bit secular in some way, and some certain aspect are religious, and they negotiate back and forth in even daily life. Oh, I go to the Friday prayers, but at the same time, I want to celebrate over the weekend. Some even drink. Some are not, they don't drink. And some, they don't even fast Ramadan, but they say culturally, I'm a Muslim, so and so. And you go back and forth. It's not either, oh, I'm religious or I'm really secular. So it's really a negotiated, multifaceted identity. And the law reflects that too. The third aspect, James, is tribal or social laws that has nothing to do with Islam or the secular modern laws that were inherited in the 20th century, and that's where people go to customs and traditions. And you'll find in the countryside. North Africa in general, including Libya, actually, its Islam is Maliki, moderate Islam, and also Sufi mystical Islam, which very, very tolerant of pre-Islamic traditions. That's the difference between North African Islam and, say, the very harsh Wahhabis brand, which has been always isolated in Arabia, and only after the oil revolution and late 20th century, they became really active in propagating their own brand. So the key here, what I'm trying to say, there is tremendous diversity in what's really a Muslim what's the relevance of Islam to modern life, what's really should be taken or not, and you'll find variety of places and interpretation, including the rule of law and courts. Should we hear from my students? I'm going to give you credit if you ask a question. Come on. Or we're going to have a long day on Wednesday. Okay, good. I'm hearing. Yes, go ahead.
So, you talked about...
One sec.
You want to?
Let's see the mic. There you go. Thanks.
So you talked about like the Pledge of Allegiance and the controversy between the under God part in
Yes.
it. Can you expand more about that?
Yes, the Pledge of Allegiance is really very old, but it took a different interpretation or meaning in the 1950s at the height stage of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. And President Eisenhower, in the research I did, probably James knows more about that stuff than me, is he recommended adding under God. But that became a really popular in certain section of the society, and others they said, "Oh, that's really not really. That's really putting religion in the Constitution." And I discovered that in the year 2002, a court, had a ruling that it's not constitutional, and from that point, I don't think it's being contested in any court. But there are people who think that the Pledge of Allegiance is still a very American and very part of our nationalism. So it's a contested thing, in other words, in a sense. I have somebody else, I think it was you, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, okay, ask me a question.
I was just going to ask why you think that so many other countries other than the U.S. like completely rewrite their constitution. So like Libya has done it.
Well, that's a
3
good
times.
question, because two things happens. When you have a revolution, most revolution, the new order, a new coalition emerges of people, and it's in most cases, they try to write a new constitution. They say, oh, we revolted against the old one, for crying out loud. So we want to have something that representing us and our aspiration and our goals and what we want to do. Now, we know it ain't easy to just do that, because when you start to say, okay, we got rid of the old regime, but what we're going to replace it with, that's always contentious. And some of you who take my comparative revolution course, they know it's one of the hardest things. And it's fought really hard, and it's very contentious thing. And that happens in all society and all revolutions. Now, in normal situations, it doesn't have to be negotiated in a drastic, radical way. But the Supreme Court in the United States is continuously interprets new cases and has ruling in new cases. So in a way, my argument is that we do that continuously because society is changing. Society is not frozen in the 18th century. Your own generation might find things that are different than the older generation. For example, homosexuality is now to your generation have a more open, more egalitarian attitude toward it. In the old days, it was not. And the new issues about environment might be even become more important issues that unify people. So, in other words, the law is not a static statements only relegated to judges and legal legislative groups or judicial groups. It is really society, or some of a member of society would be engaged in it and lobbying it and trying to get a ruling for it, and it continues like this. Another example, Citizen United of the infamous, in my opinion, ruling by the Supreme Court led to horrendous consequences for us now. I mean, you guys read the article about multinational corporations and the ruling about sugar and cholesterol lately? It's a big scandal. Huge. You should be up in arms, all of us. But that's another example. Now, is this new? No, it's not. What we need to come out, what's the larger meaning out of this is that society or segment of society always negotiates the law, because the law is meaningless itself. The law has a meaning because of us and the conflict and the compromises and the ruling that states and society relations participate in all the time.
So I think it's a good place to. Oh no, we got more questions to do.
Okay, go ahead, Nick. Nick, yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Lightning round.
No.
Okay.
Let them. Nick,
you-
go ahead.
You touched on the different genders, different nationalities living in Libya, and their stance on a new constitution. My question is there a pattern in generations? So the difference in generations, does there seem to be an overall pattern in certain groups of people supporting a new constitution, and maybe even elaborating on that of how the new constitution affects family dynamics within a single household?
That's a very good question, Nick. Libyan society changed quite a bit from 1951 until now. So education is more widespread. Literacy rate is high, as shared with the audience today. And also social mobility. I mean, Libyan women, my goodness, this is one of the most wonderful stories in Libya. Libyan women are at the core of the society. They are, engineers, teachers, journalists, judges, pilots, in a society that's supposed to be really conventional and conservative. And it came out of a horrible colonial war. And people didn't have chance to do that. I mean, just give you an example. I have two sisters. And they were the first two in the family to have college degrees. And after that, all of my nieces now are, all kind of doctors, engineers, journalists, artists, what have you. So that's really in just 2 generations, you see the change now going on. Libyan universities, for example, there are now 20 universities in Libya, 7 at least are strong ones. And this is really a very positive movement among all of the different regimes. 60 to 70% sometimes of the student body in these universities are females. And their voices are visible now. Their participation is visible. But at the same time, Libyan society has a problem. And the problem in Libya is the following. There is incredible traditions of social protest. They protest everything. They go to the street about everything they don't like. And they are so judgmental about what's going on with the elite. They don't fear. They don't have the timid fear of some societies for historical reasons. At the same time, Libyans, while they celebrate their fierce independence, surprisingly like Maine. Maine has a wonderful tradition of being independent. But at the same time, Libyans really don't like institutions. And I think from the monarchy on, all the elites that led Libya failed to establish strong institutions. So it became really continuous mobilization, continuous protests against the government. And you need at some time to pause and say, what's going to be really important, not only the rule of law, but to really teach and deepen the understanding that strong institution will for everybody and will protect everybody. In America, as I made the analogy earlier, despite the fact that it was a settler colony, and there are a lot of problems that we deal with it, I think one of the strengths of our system in the United States is we have strong institutions. And the constitution kept changing to adapt to waves of change. In Libya, I think there is no problem. There is a big problem with the institutions, and right now, Libya faces the 20th century with tremendous social awareness about change and participating, but still the public institutions and the national institutions are very weak. And in 2011, they asked me, I think an NPR, and Charlie Rose also asked me this question, and I said, I'm sick and tired of strong leaders in Libya. I think we want boring, ordinary leaders in Libya. And that's good in itself. I think I was a little bit maybe too quick to answer that. Now when I think about it, there is a vacuum. Actually, you need strong leaders, at least in transitional periods, Nick. But at the same time, when a leader who doesn't want to stay, he or she doesn't want to stay forever, and also build strong institutions for the people after that. Young people now are part of this new change. They are very, very impatient. They really think that the old folks are fixated on the old point of view, and they just want some stability in the country. They also want to play a major role and not the old educated older generations. The Libyan family also changing. The sacred constant in Libyan society is the family. The family is sacred after Islam, after religion in a broader sense, not in a fundamentalist sense. So the family is really the institution that keeps the society together. But right now, the women, young men, they are rebelling against choices of marriage, residence, choices of education, and they are really savvy because they use the internet, they use technology, they travel abroad, they study abroad, they are active in social media, and they have the lively, and they also sometimes they organize in many associations that reflect their own thinking. And I think this is positive. So I think the youth are part of larger societal soul searching. The only problem in Libya that faces, which I indicated earlier, is all of those wonderful things that go on for Libyan society. And they have oil, they have location, they have the best beaches that's still remaining virgin in the Mediterranean. They have the biggest Roman intact city in Libya, Leptis Magnus. There is a lot going on they have an educated population. But without resolving the civil war and trying to settle scores, who was with Gaddafi, who was with the monarchy, who was really a traitor, who was a reactionary, who was really so-and-so, and trying to find points of agreement. And moving on, all of those assets, all of those wonderful social capital that one could say exists in Libyan society after 2011 might be, unfortunately, a marginal issue, and the country might disintegrate more. I hope not, but that's the challenge in the coming months and maybe a year. All right, I think